Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are examining one of the most complex and significant diplomatic agreements of the 21st century, Iran's nuclear deal, formerly known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA. This is not merely another account of foreign policy. It is a critical issue that impacts global security, regional stability, and the future of nuclear non-proliferation. Whether you are new to this subject or seeking to comprehend the latest developments, I will clarify the essential aspects of this vital agreement and its relevance for everyone. To begin, the JCPOA was signed in 2015 between Iran and the P5+1, which includes the United States, United Kingdom, France, Germany, Russia, and China. To grasp the necessity of this deal, we must delve into its historical context. Iran's nuclear program originated in the 1950s with American support under the Atoms for Peace initiative. Following the 1979 Islamic Revolution, apprehensions regarding Iran's nuclear ambitions heightened. By the early 2000s, it became evident that Iran was advancing its nuclear capabilities potentially for weaponization, rather than solely for peaceful energy purposes. In response, the international community imposed sanctions, imposing economic penalties that severely limited Iran's economy. The decline in oil exports, currency devaluation, and the resulting hardship for ordinary Iranians exerted pressure that ultimately led Iran to engage in negotiations. The JCPOA emerged from years of meticulous negotiations, embodying a significant agreement. Iran would substantially curtail its nuclear program in exchange for relief from sanctions. However, the pathway for this deal has been fraught with challenges. Let us now examine the essential provisions of the JCPOA. First, uranium enrichment limits. Iran agreed to reduce its uranium stockpile by 98% and limit enrichment to 3.67%, far below the 90% needed for weapons. They also agreed to use only older, less efficient centrifuges for enrichment. Second, facility restrictions. Iran's Fordow facility was converted from an enrichment site to a research center. At Natanz, they could only operate about 5,000 centrifuges instead of the 19,000 they had before. Third, the Arak reactor was redesigned to produce less plutonium, another potential weapons material. Fourth, and crucially, Iran accepted unprecedented international monitoring. The International Atomic Energy Agency gained access to Iran's entire nuclear supply chain, from uranium mines to waste storage. Finally, these restrictions came with a timeline. Most would last 10 to 15 years, with some monitoring provisions extending to 25 years. In return, Iran got significant sanctions relief, unfreezing billions in assets and allowing oil exports to resume. It seemed like a win-win scenario. But then came 2018. President Trump announced that the United States was withdrawing from the JCPOA, calling it the worst deal ever negotiated. This decision shocked America's European allies, who remained committed to the agreement. Trump's administration reimposed sanctions under a policy of maximum pressure, aimed at forcing Iran back to negotiations for a better deal. The reasoning was that the JCPOA's restrictions were temporary. It didn't address Iran's ballistic missile program, and it didn't curb Iran's regional activities. However, this withdrawal had immediate consequences. Iran initially continued complying with the nuclear restrictions, hoping European partners could provide economic relief. But as the sanctions bite deepened and promised European mechanisms failed to materialize, Iran began gradually stepping back from its commitments. By 2019, Iran was enriching uranium beyond JCPOA limits, and by 2021, it had accumulated stockpiles far exceeding the agreement's restrictions. Where do things stand today? It's complicated. When President Biden took office in 2021, he pledged to return to diplomacy. Multiple rounds of indirect negotiations took place in Vienna, with European mediators shuttling between American and Iranian delegations. These talks came tantalizingly close to success in early 2022, but ultimately stalled. Several factors contributed to this impasse. Iran's demands that the Revolutionary Guard be removed from the U.S. terrorism list, disagreements over which sanctions would be lifted, and Iran's insistence on guarantees that future U.S. administrations wouldn't withdraw again. Meanwhile, Iran's nuclear program has advanced significantly. They're now enriching uranium to 60% purity, much closer to weapons-grade levels. Their stockpile of enriched uranium is many times larger than permitted under the JCPOA. Most concerningly, they've reduced cooperation with international inspectors, creating gaps in monitoring. Regional events have further complicated matters. Iran's support for Russia in Ukraine, crackdowns on domestic protests, and evolving Middle East dynamics have all influenced the nuclear negotiations. The Iran nuclear issue isn't happening in a vacuum. It's deeply connected to broader Middle Eastern security dynamics. Iran's nuclear program affects its neighbors differently, creating a complex web of concerns and calculations. Israel views Iran's nuclear capabilities as an existential threat. Israeli leaders have repeatedly stated they won't allow Iran to develop nuclear weapons, even if it means military action. This creates a constant risk of escalation that could draw in the United States and destabilize the entire region. Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states have their own concerns. A nuclear-armed Iran would fundamentally alter the regional balance of power. Saudi officials have suggested they might pursue their own nuclear weapons if Iran develops them, potentially triggering a regional arms race. The collapse of the nuclear deal has also affected Iran's regional behavior. Some argue that increased sanctions and isolation have pushed Iran to be more aggressive through proxy forces across the Middle East, from Yemen to Lebanon to Iraq. Turkey's position is particularly interesting. It has maintained economic ties with Iran despite sanctions, viewing stability and trade as priorities over non-proliferation concerns. Beyond the Middle East, Iran's nuclear program raises fundamental questions about global security architecture. The JCPOA was seen as a test case for diplomatic solutions to nuclear proliferation. Its current state sends mixed signals about the effectiveness of negotiations versus sanctions and pressure. From a non-proliferation perspective, Iran's nuclear advances are deeply concerning. Every month that passes without constraints, Iran's technical knowledge grows. Even if a future deal rolls back their program, they'll retain what experts call breakout capability, the knowledge and infrastructure to quickly develop weapons if they choose. This has implications for other potential proliferators. North Korea has already demonstrated that nuclear weapons can provide security guarantees and negotiating leverage. If Iran follows a similar path, it could encourage other countries to pursue nuclear weapons rather than rely on international security assurances. The credibility of international institutions is also at stake. The International Atomic Energy Agency's ability to monitor and verify compliance depends on cooperation from member states. Iran's reduced cooperation with inspectors weakens the broader non-proliferation regime. There's also the question of alliance relationships. The US withdrawal from the JCPOA strained relationships with European allies and raised questions about American reliability in international agreements. Looking ahead, several scenarios could unfold. Let's examine the most likely possibilities. First, renewed diplomacy. A new nuclear deal remains possible, though it would likely need to address issues beyond the original JCPOA, possibly including ballistic missiles and regional activities. This would require concessions from all sides and strong political will. Second, containment and deterrence. Without a deal, the international community might focus on containing Iran's nuclear program through continued sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and security cooperation with regional allies. This approach accepts Iran as a nuclear threshold state, but tries to prevent weaponization. Third, military action. Israel has repeatedly threatened military strikes if diplomacy fails. Such action could set back Iran's program temporarily, but might also trigger regional conflict and potentially accelerate rather than prevent Iranian nuclear weapons development. Fourth, Iranian nuclear breakout. Iran could decide to openly pursue nuclear weapons, especially if it concludes that sanctions won't be lifted regardless. This would represent a complete breakdown of the diplomatic process and likely trigger severe international responses. Each scenario carries significant risks and uncertainties, which is why the nuclear issue remains such a critical global concern. The Iran nuclear deal story illustrates the complexity of modern diplomacy and international security. What started as a promising diplomatic breakthrough has become a cautionary tale about the challenges of sustaining international agreements across different political administrations and changing geopolitical circumstances. The stakes couldn't be higher. Iran's nuclear program affects not just regional stability, but global non-proliferation efforts, alliance relationships, and the credibility of international institutions. Whether through renewed diplomacy, alternative arrangements, or continued confrontation, the international community must find ways to address these challenges. The lesson here isn't that diplomacy is futile. The JCPOA did successfully constrain Iran's nuclear program for several years. Rather, it shows that international agreements require sustained commitment, flexibility, and recognition that security challenges evolve over time. As we continue to watch this situation develop, it's worth remembering that behind the technical details and diplomatic maneuvering are real consequences for millions of people across the Middle East and beyond. What do you think? Should the international community prioritize diplomatic solutions, or are other approaches more realistic at this point? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more analysis of global security issues. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.